Stay. Stay. Let's go in, do as I tell you. This little Yanmar starter costs $1,100 for the OEM factory version. Let's see if we can fix it for less than $50. Now, while these little starters are really powerful little packages, they're very, very pricey. And Yanmar even sells an aftermarket version that's between $180 and $300 depending on where you get it. And I bought lots of those and they're great. They hold up great. Not so sure why the identical, OEM is over $1,000. But a lot of times, it's something really small. Like on this one, this stud is the only thing that's stripped out. Somebody over-tightened this nut and it really screwed up these threads. So that's really all that needs to be fixed on this guy. And instead of spending almost $300 after tax, is there a way that I can fix just that? Let's see. Alright, so for the video, I'm actually going to just tear this whole thing apart for you guys. This is actually my old starter, and this thing is pretty much new. It has very few hours on it. The only issue it has, and the reason why I removed it, was somebody over-tightened this nut, and the whole center section of the threads is missing. I'll show you that here in a second. But so I want to fix that. But in case you guys are curious, let's pull this thing apart. I'll actually show you how these modern starters are built. They're quite cool because not only does this fit the small YM series engines, but these starters also fit the larger 4JH. And that's because they use a gear reduction technology inside, and basically this section has like a planetary gear set inside, and by doing that you're able to have a significantly smaller starter that packs quite the punch, and it's really awesome. I first came across these when I was working in the trucking industry, where the old school starters that I'd be removing were super big and heavy. And then the more modern ones that we would be installing after that were like less than half the size and weight. So it was quite a concept for what they were. So I don't want to throw this thing away. This is an actual Hitachi that's made in Japan. They're very expensive, and I would like to have a spare on my boat just in case my aftermarket starter does fail. Alright, let's get this solenoid off. It looks like we have two 10mm bolts on the back, I believe. Yep. I'll just use the impact because it's quicker. Now when you're doing this, take your time, be slow, because there are going to be pieces that may be loose inside here. So as I undo these screws, I'm going to very, very slowly kind of pull this thing apart and pay attention to how it's assembled. And see how the arm is in there? That arm engages with this plunger right here. So we'll take the end cap off of there for now and get that out of our way. That way we can separate our body. So I think the end cap, we've got a couple screws that hold our brush plate on, and then two 8mm screws that hold the overall cap. Probably would have been easier to do this to begin with. Let's see. Oh, there we go, screw number one. Now sometimes I know it can be tempting to want to take the impact to these little tiny screws. I would resist the urge, because if, your screwdriver slips, you're going to strip these and just destroy them. So if you can, at least try it with a screwdriver first before you take force to it. There we go. So even with hand surgery, I can undo those. So if you need to, you can stick this in a vise and tap your screwdriver with a hammer. And a lot of times you'll be able to, you know, kind of jar it loose the same way an impact would go. But an impact is really, really easy to, you know, strip out your screw head. So just be gentle if you're going to do that. So these long screws are what's going to hold this whole body together. And we'll take off our end cap here first. And this is just an end cap and it's full of crud, so we'll clean all that up. And here's our brush plate right here. And our motor and our gear set right behind it. So there we go. Not too hard. This housing with our magnets looks really good. And see these little guys right here? These are called brushes, and they're held in with these little springs that keep tension on our armature right there. And this starter, like I said, doesn't have a whole ton of wear. So really all it needs is a little bit of cleanup. It's actually in really decent shape. This doesn't look like it's damaged. I'm curious about these divots. Those are really interesting. I don't know if I've seen that on an electric motor. I'm not an electric motor rebuilder. I know how to rebuild them, but you know, it's quite interesting to see that. But this motor pretty much is the entire, you know, assembly that then goes to our gear reduction. So we've got this plate that protects the back of the motor and keeps the grease inside. And then here is our planetary gear set. And so when our starter is turning, we've got our planetary gears that turn. And so this part of the housing is our gear reduction. Let's get this nut off so we can separate that. So what I'm going to do with the innards of the starter is I'm literally just going to clean everything out. We'll put some fresh grease in there. You know, just make sure it's not super full of crud. And then, you know, we'll reassemble it. And it should be good to go for a while. So we'll get our negative on, and you can always tell which side's the negative because it's tied into our housing on the solenoid body. So we'll get that out of the way for now. This little plate, if I wanted to take my brushes off, I can pop this plate out. I may need my pliers here, or a screwdriver perhaps. See if we can pop this plate out without it flying across the shop. There we go. There's our plate. And our brushes are going to want to spring in because the springs are kind of holding them. And there's our brushes. And so all these brushes, see this little spring right here? That's what keeps the tension on them. And they just ride along this armature right here. And so a lot of times with electric motors, sometimes your brushes are real worn or they're real dirty. And so cleaning, you know, the contact surface up here can make a lot of difference. So that's called our brush guard or a brush plate. This is the actual electric motor, and the output shaft of our electric motor has a keyed gear set that engages with our planetary gears. Next is our planetary gear set. And these guys just ride inside this housing, and you'll want to pay attention to how this housing sits. And these little guys are greased. They've got little needle bearings inside them. And they just ride inside this housing as it rotates and reduces the ratio so the motor doesn't have to work as hard to have more torque. It's pretty cool technology, actually. Planetary gear sets are one of the most fascinating forms of gear reduction you can use. It's so efficient and it's so simple. So I love seeing it. You'll see it on, different reverse gears and stuff like that too. So back here, let's see if this guy can come out. So back of our housing, get that out of the way. And this guy is our Bendix gear that when the motor is turning, it pops out. When that solenoid goes in, this arm grabs it, pops it out, and it starts spinning. Now when you take this apart, make sure that this arm is engaging with the right part, because it'd be really easy to flip it over and engage it with the wrong part. So pay attention to how this stuff is engaged. There's our twist gear right there. So we'll get this stuff cleaned up, but none of this stuff is missing teeth. Our plastic arm here is not broken. Looks like this little bearing right here or bushing is working. That's what stops our Bendix from going all the way out and crashing into more than just our flywheel. But yeah, a very, very simple concept that works really well. I'm going to get cleaned up here, and then let's see if we can get this solenoid torn apart and get to that stud. I've never torn one of these apart, so we'll see what it's made up of. Alright, so now that we've kind of got this thing torn apart, let's take a look at this solenoid. It does not look like it's that serviceable. We'll move these guys out of the way. Oh, there we go, little retention spring. And basically what this guy is it's an electromagnet. So when you energize this solenoid, it's going to suck a plunger in and hold it there. As long as you're applying, that signal voltage with your key, it's going to be pulling on this plunger. And this plunger just sits in here over what looks like just a spring, and there's another plunger in there, but it looks like we can't service it. I don't think. I'm not seeing anything that I could get this piece out. So it looks like I actually would have to replace this, which isn't the end of the world because these solenoids by themselves are not that expensive. And so what's cool about having a solenoid is without a solenoid, you would need heavy gauge wire running all the way up to your panel. And think of the heavy wire, the heavy positive that you run to your starter. A lot of times it's anything from like 2 gauge wire up to like 4/0 wire. You can't have 4/0 running all the way up to, the bridge or your cockpit behind your key switch. And so that's where our signal wire, which is this little spade connector, comes in. And we apply 12 volts to that, and it makes the connection inside this, which then engages our plunger. So this is a common failure point. It's a very simple thing. All it is an electromagnet. And so if you did want to carry spares, a lot of people do actually just carry like the solenoid as one of their spare parts instead of an entire starter. That being said, you gotta be mechanically minded, you know, to be comfortable tearing this stuff apart. But the solenoid is one of the most common failures. The brushes are another common failure. All the brushes are little carbon blocks that are held in these slots by springs. And they have, you know, electrical connections that are soldered to this plate attached to them. And these blocks, as they're riding on your commutator, which is this part, they'll wear down. That's where you're getting all this, you know, carbon dust is from our brushes. And so a really common failure point on electric motors is the brushes get worn, or they get dirty, or our commutator gets dirty or corroded. And so, you know, these brushes, not hard to replace. I think you can actually buy this whole assembly for this particular model starter, and so you wouldn't even have to deal with the hassle of removing each brush and replacing them. But a lot of electric motors, the brushes are really accessible and easy to replace if you wanted to do that. The third thing I would say that's probably the most common failure is our kind of Bendix assembly here. And usually that's a result of people not letting off their ignition key in a reasonable time. So they'll be cranking the engine, and once the engine gets started on its own, they won't let off the key, meaning this little Bendix gear is really, really spinning with the flywheel, or it's partially spinning, and it can damage either the motor or any of this assembly. This little cylinder right here is kind of a one-way clutch. And let me see if I can get this a little closer so you can see. When this Bendix gear kicks out, it rides on this helical gear, and it actually rotates about a quarter turn. And the reason for that is, depending on how your flywheel is engaging with your Bendix, that turn will help the teeth engage every time, regardless of the position of your flywheel. So this clutch is essentially a one-way clutch that helps this engage with our energized motor and start spinning. And so without that clutch, it wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't be able to harness the power of our little electric motor there and actually turn the flywheel. It would just kick out and free spin, you know, not do anything. So we do need a clutch that's able to allow this gear to harness the torque from our motor and actually transfer that torque into the flywheel of the engine, cranking the engine. So a very simple setup, really not much to it. I'm gonna get this all cleaned up and reassembled, and you know, we'll see if it works. So, was it worth the effort tearing our starter apart? As a matter of fact, it was. I looked up what a solenoid for one of these costs, and it's between 38 and 50 bucks, depending on where you get it, and it's a real easy fix. So instead of buying even an aftermarket one to have as a spare, just because of a screwed up stud or something like that, why not rebuild one of these with regular hand tools and an hour at your leisure? So anyways, I hope you guys learned something tonight. I hope you enjoyed the video. I really appreciate you guys hanging till the end, and I will plan on seeing you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.